Hey everyone, today we have a recap of the 2006 sci-fi thriller called Deja Vu. The residents of New Orleans are celebrating Fat Tuesday on a naval ferry. Suddenly, a massive explosion occurs on the vessel, killing 543 people. The FBI, police, and ATF Bureau arrive to investigate, with ATF agent Doug Carlin among them. Doug's main task is to find answers about what explosives the terrorist used, and Doug successfully handles this assignment. From his colleague Kevin Donnelly, Doug learns that sometime before the explosion, a woman called asking for a description of Doug's appearance. Doug tries to call her back, but no one answers. On surveillance camera footage, Doug spots a suspicious man leaving the bridge on a motorcycle. Later, Doug calls Sheriff Reed, who tells him about a woman's body found on the shore, with 30% of it covered in burns. Doug, learning that the body was discovered before the ferry attack, is surprised and heads to the morgue. On the woman's body, besides burns, they discover severed fingers on her right hand and traces of duct tape around her mouth. From Kevin, Doug learns that a certain Claire Kuchever was reported missing that morning, after which he goes to meet her father. The man confirms that the dead woman is Claire. Doug asks for the key to Claire's apartment and learns that the day before, Claire was planning to meet an unknown man. On the porch, Claire's father hands Doug an envelope with photos of his daughter. In Claire's house, Doug discovers an inscription reading, "You can save her," as well as numerous bloodstains. The final discovery is a recent call from Doug among the recordings on the answering machine and multiple bloody bandages in the trash can. At the station, experts try to determine the make of the SUV in which the terrorist presumably brought the explosives to the ferry. Doug approaches and tells them about Claire, whose red-beige Ford went missing. Doug claims that solving the circumstances of Claire's death will lead them to catch the terrorist. He concludes that Claire was kidnapped from her home for her SUV, then killed and her death staged as a result of the explosion. Doug also learns shocking news. One of the terror attack victims is his friend and partner Larry Minuti. In the evening, Doug is invited to a secret laboratory where Dr. Alexander Denny presents him with unique technology, Project Snow White, consisting of 7 surveillance satellites representing the 7 dwarfs. With their help, one can observe terrain as if it were being filmed by a camera at that moment. However, investigators need to be told where to look, since Snow White doesn't have a save and rewind function, and the recording updates only every 4.5 days. Doug orders them to watch Claire's house. While he observes the woman intently, a colleague calls to inform Doug that he left many fingerprints in Claire's house. This is strange since Doug wore gloves and acted very carefully. Later, Doug learns through Snow White that Claire felt someone was watching her. He believes she can sense their presence, but Denny convinces him it's impossible because the connection is one way. After several hours of watching Claire, Doug begins to feel something for the woman. Later, he attends Claire's funeral. In the laboratory, Doug catches the moment when Claire receives a call from the terrorist who allegedly intends to buy her car. The observers manage to spot the terrorist on cameras, but fail to identify him. Later, Doug tries to shine a red laser at the screen, and Claire from the past sees the beam, causing Snow White to malfunction due to a breach in the force field. He realizes that the Snow White recordings aren't reconstructions and asks the scientist to reveal the truth. The scientists tell Doug that he's looking at an open channel to the past where Claire is alive and well. Doug understands the possibilities that have opened up and suggests changing the past to stop the criminal. However, the scientist claims this is physically impossible. One of the scientists, Shanti, tells the men about the theory of parallel universes. She believes their interference in the past will create another world, but Denny doesn't believe this. Doug asks to send a note to the past warning about the attack on the vessel. The scientists manage to leave a note on past Doug's desk, but it's too late. Doug has already left, and his partner Larry reads the note and immediately heads to the port. There, Doug and the others use Snow White to track down the criminal. Larry tries to stop him alone, but the terrorist shoots him in the chest, then loads his body into his car and drives away, leaving Snow White's coverage area. Doug gives chase and observes the criminal's actions through a cyber eye, a device that allows him to see the past. Watching both the past and present simultaneously, Doug follows the criminal. He arrives at a house destroyed as if by an explosion, which is still intact in the past. There, the criminal takes Larry from the van and douses him with flammable liquid. Larry regains consciousness, but the criminal finally kills him with a gunshot and then sets the body on fire. Shocked by the death scene, the scientist believes Larry died because of their interference in the past, but Denny remains convinced that changing the past is impossible and they played no role in Doug's friend's death. Now the investigators have enough information to learn the criminal's identity. His name is Carol Urstadt. After determining Carol's location, police arrest him. During interrogation, Carol confirms Doug's theory about Claire's death and then tells Doug about his motive. He yearns to leave his mark in history to remain for eternity, and he's confident he'll succeed. Doug calls Carol just an ordinary killer who will spend long years in prison. FBI agent Jack McCready is determined to close the investigation and work on the report since the terrorist has been found. But Doug intends to return to the past and prevent Claire's death. Another FBI representative, Paul Priswara, tries to dissuade him from this idea, saying that the dead can't be brought back and Claire's death isn't his fault. However, Doug doesn't abandon his intentions. Denny agrees to send Doug to the past, despite unsuccessful experiments with transporting living organisms. Minimizing his mass, Doug, believing in the best outcome, undresses and sits in the capsule. Denny starts the process, and Doug is transported to the past 4.5 days ago. Doug's heart can't withstand the powerful electromagnetic pulse. He's rushed to the hospital in a state of clinical death, but doctors manage to resuscitate him. Coming to his senses, Doug disarms a guard and steals an ambulance, driving to Carol's house where Claire's murder is currently being prepared. Doug arrives in time, but Carol shoots him and explodes gas canisters. Thinking Doug and Claire are dead, he goes to blow up the ferry. Doug frees the psychologically traumatized Claire and takes her home. There, Doug arranges letters on the refrigerator to spell, "You can save her," and then tends to his wounds. Suddenly, Claire appears in the room and points a gun at Doug. She's afraid that Doug knows too much about her and threatens to call the police. Doug tries to convince Claire that he's from the police himself, but the girl doesn't believe him. She calls ATF and asks Kevin about Doug, requesting a description of his appearance. Convinced that Doug really is from the police, she asks him to explain what's happening.
What if you had to tell someone the most important thing in the world, but you knew they'd never believe you?
Claire responds that she might believe him, then tearfully embraces Doug. Having calmed down, she caringly helps Doug treat his wounds while he tells her about Snow White. Looking at the bloody bandages, Doug realizes that it was precisely because of his actions that the room acquired the appearance in which he found it during the search. Fearing that he hasn't fixed anything and Claire is still in danger, Doug takes the woman with him to the ferry. At the dock, Doug shows Claire the terrorist and asks her to tell the police about the bomb. Doug asks Claire to be careful, then kisses her and leaves. Carol, having disembarked, sees a familiar car that shouldn't be at the dock. He returns to the ferry, and Claire, seeing this, does the same, wanting to help Doug. Meanwhile, Doug realizes something is wrong when he doesn't see Carol on the bridge. He finds the criminal on the car deck, where he starts a shootout. Doug discovers that Claire is in the car with the bomb. At Doug's request, she starts the car and then runs down Carol. Doug finishes off the criminal with a gunshot and frees Claire. The explosion is about to happen any minute, and Claire and Doug, trying to divert the explosion away from the ferry, accelerate the car and it falls into the water. Doug manages to free Claire but dies in the explosion himself. Stunned by what's happening, Claire sits on the dock. An approaching police officer asks her to stay and tell everything she knows to an investigator. The investigator turns out to be the real Doug from this universe. Claire, trying to comprehend what's happening, tells Doug she already knows him, and they walk to the car together. Suddenly, Doug seems to remember something, and then Claire asks Doug the familiar question.
What if you had to tell someone the most important thing in the world, but you knew they'd never believe you?
Doug, experiencing déjà vu, answers Claire with her own words.
I try.
After which they drive away from the dock together. That's where the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching.